Just Breathe is a monthly podcast where youth ministry has a say. Hosts Shannon Harper and Eric Bliss interview youth and adults who hold a vision of liberal religious youth ministry that is both life-saving and spirit-lifting. Come join us for these rich and enlivening conversations. Explore faith, spirituality, and life purpose as never before. And above all, bring your authentic self and just breathe.
Hello and welcome to Just Breathe Live, the podcast for youth and young adults in Unitarian Universalism. I am Shannon Harper.
And I am Eric Bliss.
And we are so glad that you are joining us today. We have some exciting guests, but before we get to our guests, Bliss, how you doing?
I am doing okay. In the continuation of our Trader Joe's theme, I did just eat some peanut butter cups from Trader Joe's, and they were delicious. I'm getting that little sugary kick from those peanut butter cups, and I am ready to go. Also ate some delicious tacos. We were telling the guests in our prep session right before. I'm not going to bore our audience with these tacos, but sweet potato and chicken, avocado. Ooh. Quite the combination.
Did you have any kind of sauce on that? It sounds like
yeah, there was an avocado crema and a mild pico.
And was this all from Trader Joe's, or was just the peanut butter cups?
No, just the peanut butter cups, just dessert.
For those of you who don't know, we are really pushing for a Trader Joe's sponsorship. So whenever Trader Joe's reaches out to us, we will be happy to respond.
Call me.
Yeah, we're ready. We love Trader Joe's. Awesome.
How are you doing, Shannon? What was your? Do you want to tell us about your lunch?
Well, not really, because I didn't really have one. That didn't happen yet. But I'm doing good. I'm okay. I did a little shopping today. I have my coffee, and that's all that really matters. Let's jump into our check-in question for today, shall we?
Why not?
Yeah, our check-in question is, what is in your cup or goblet? Whatever you want to drink out of. What liquid is in it, and how full is it today?
Should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, I'm reminded of the scene from the end of Indiana Jones, the third movie, The Last Crusade, when they have to pick the goblet. And, they... Clearly, you have not seen this movie or haven't seen it recently. You've seen it? Okay.
Not recently, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well, and so, when I think of goblet, I think of like that particular scene. Random thought, which I have many. But I think my goblet today is got to be my UUA mug. I've got this wonderful black UA mug that has like a lime green interior. I love to make honey sweetened chamomile tea in it. And I think that's what's in my cup. It is filled with delicious, warm, honeyed chamomile tea. What about you?
That sounds lovely. First of all, I'm a potter. I don't know if you knew that, Eric, but I'm a potter, and I make a lot of my mugs. So my favorite thing is to drink out of one of the mugs that I have actually made. There's something to being able to like make art that you get to use and like put against your mouth and like hold in your hand. It's fantastic. And today in my mug, it's not in my mug right now, but if I could choose what could be in my mug, I would love a really good latte. I need the caffeine today. I need to wake up. I did not want to get out of bed today. It was one of those days where you just like push the snooze over and over and over again. I need the caffeine.
It's danger town. I read that by snoozing, you actually reduce your energy level for the rest of the day. Is that true? Have you read that?
Listeners, you need to give us some feedback on that. I don't know.
In the comment section, please let us know. What's the 411 on snoozing. But let's breathe together. We always will do some breathing together, and then we'll dive into introducing our wonderful guests today. We have outstanding guests. I'm so excited to be with this group. So get comfortable wherever you are, relax. In the words of my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Hicks, be here now. And so I invite you to take one big, deep belly breath with me. And we're going to do this both to bring ourselves into this present moment. And also, if you like, set an intention. My intention right now is about peace worldwide. I'm very, very worried about the situation in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. And I imagine you may have some thoughts about that as well. So as you're taking that deep belly breath, feel free to set an intention for greater peace in that area and in the rest of the world. So here we go. Peace. Who are our guests?
Okay, so I'm so excited because first of all, I think this might be, this is our first international interview that we've had. I mean, I don't know. Other
Well,
people.
yes and no. Lane, who was with us
Oh, right.
was out of the country, but I think in terms of like technically interviewing international guests,
Yeah,
we've
this is
leveled
it.
up. This is the level up.
And it makes so much sense that it would be Canadians, right? Because they are our closest like partners in Unitarian Universalism, which I
Our
love.
friends to the north.
Yes, so we have guests from Canada. I am excited to introduce to you Linnea Granberg. They are the Senior Youth Observer to the Board of the CUC, which is the Canadian Unitarian Council. Okay. She lives in Toronto, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Mississauga peoples on Treaty 13 land, and is from Thunder Bay, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and I'm going to pronounce that one wrong. Help me out, Linnea. Métis. Thank you. On Robinson Superior Treaty land. She attended church as a child and has been involved in UUism nationally since she was 14, serving in staff positions for many youth cons. And a youth con is short for conference, weekend-long events for youth. She is currently in her second year at the University of Toronto, double majoring in history and archaeology with a minor in political science. Welcome, Linnea.
Welcome. And I get to introduce Eric James. Eric, lovely first name, spells it with a C, just like me. Eric James is the Junior Youth Observer to the Board of the Canadian Unitarian Council. He's from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, the traditional territory of the Sioux, Cree, Métis, and Niitsitapi peoples. Close? Okay. On Treaty 6 land, where he grew up a Unitarian Universalist and stays involved in that community to this day. He's planning to go to school to be a paramedic. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
And finally, we are introducing Casey. Casey Stainsby is the Youth and Young Adult Programs and Events Coordinator for the Canadian Unitarian Council. A lifelong UU, she is committed to supporting young people as they tap into the necessary magic of community for building resilience and meaning as we move through this world. She lives as an uninvited guest on the territories, oh, Casey,
You put some notes for you there.
You made a note for me? Oh, of the, I'm sorry, these are like.
No problem. So many new names for you. Lekwungen speaking people
Yes,
with
thank
St.
you. Which is AKA Victoria, British Columbia, and is sustained every day by the oceans and cedars of this place. Casey is also working on a master's in divinity at the Vancouver School of Theology. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you.
And Eric and I apologize for being, from the United States and not understanding how to pronounce all of these wonderful people's lands that are up to the north of us. So,
I mean, there's so many peoples in the States whose names I would not be able to pronounce. So it's all good.
We're all learning, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we love to invite our guests to also do a check-in. And our check-in question, as you might have heard, is what is your cup or goblet and what's filling it? How full is it today?
I can go. So my cup is my very large water bottle. It's full of water, predictably. I drink a lot of water. I go through probably 1.5 of these at least a day. So I'm a big water fan.
Normally in the morning it would be a cup of coffee, but this is my day off, so I went with a can of cream soda. So it's not really a cup; it's more of a can. I think I opened it about 15 minutes ago, and it's already empty. So drank it pretty quickly, but yeah.
Going literal. I love it.
I'm going to take it back to the metaphorical and be just like the most West Coast stereotype. I'm going to go with a hibiscus kombucha because I'm feeling kind of bubbly today. And yeah, a little bit just like not quite grounded, like a little bit floaty and
Effervescent.
yeah. And maybe like that tang of sour with the hibiscus too is like feeling on point for me today, but in like a pleasant way.
I love it. Hibiscus kombucha is like one of my favorite drinks. I drink one almost every day.
It's an interesting beverage. The first time I encountered kombucha, I was on a road trip staying with a friend of mine in Oregon, and he had this giant jar on top of his fridge with this thing that was growing in it that looked like an alien from the movie Aliens. And I said, "What is that?" He's like, "Oh, that's a drink. It's called kombucha." It was the first I'd ever heard of it. And the vision of that thing floating in the liquid, it's hard to get out of my brain.
Hey, you know what? That is a really great segue into mycelium.
Yes.
Which is also a fantastic fungus-like thing that grows and is very healthful, very beneficial. Let's talk about mycelium, which is what all of you are involved in. So can you tell us like, just first of all, tell us what mycelium is, other than we know that it's, well, hopefully we all know that it's, mushrooms. It's like the roots of mushrooms, right? But what is it? What is it? Mycelium with 2 U's. What is that in Canada? Tell us about that.
All right. So mycelium basically is this thing that got envisioned almost 2 years ago now, and it's like a youth network that aims to like connect youth across the country rather than locally or regionally, and connect youth more regularly and more regularly than a or yearly con like Canoodle, which is basically our equivalent of GA for youth. So it's kind of a youth representative body, and we really wanted to promote youth engagement in like nationally, facilitate youth dialogue, and just to foster like a greater youth presence in Unitarian Canadian or Canadian Unitarian Universalism. Eric and I are the youth observers to the board. So basically what our job is we relay information from the board to the youth and vice versa. And we do a lot of other stuff now because of mycelium, but we didn't really have an avenue to talk to youth. So that's kind of how this all got started. Yeah. Do you want to, Eric or Casey, do you want to talk about the roots and the like metaphor kind of behind the name?
Casey, I'll let you talk about it because I'm going to be honest, I still don't fully understand the metaphor. So
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So we've been pretty inspired. I mean, I've speak for myself. I've been really inspired recently by nature metaphors in organizing and reading Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy for one, which I was lucky to be in a group facilitated by Shannon last year for religious educators, reading this book and thinking about all the ways that we can model our organizing off of nature. Had a national youth body in Canada for like quite a while. It's been maybe since like 2008 or so, since we haven't had something like that. And back in the day, we of course had like a national youth committee, but that doesn't really seem to be that interesting to a lot of youth these days. I mean, not that interesting for a lot of adults probably either.
What? They don't want to join a committee? I mean, come on, Casey, are you kidding me?
I know.
You're the most exciting thing.
Shocking. So all of these needs were kind of floating around, and we were thinking, okay, how can we have some kind of like way of being connected with each other that is not a committee and that has some kind of other structure and is maybe more like modeled after nature and is a little bit more flexible and emergent and responding to the needs as they come up. And this metaphor that we landed on was of mycelium networks, which are like these, I think it's actually, I'm not like a mushroom expert myself, but I think it's the mushroom, or like the plant itself is really like the mycelium networks, like the underground, not quite root systems because it's not roots, but it maybe looks a little bit like that. It's like these mesh networks. And then the mushrooms that you see that pop up above ground are kind of like the fruit of the plant, but the plant itself is like all the mycelium networks. And so they're underground, they're like everywhere. They're like really talking to each other and helping other plants connect. And then the mushrooms emerge when the conditions are right, like when it makes sense. When there's some rain, or when there's whatever the conditions are that make it for each mushroom. I'm sure it's different. So we love these ideas, being connected and being responsive to the environment around us. So it's not necessarily that the mycelium gatherings themselves happen. We're saying like 3 or 4 times a year, and we're kind of planning them as we go, as it feels like there's a need and it makes sense. But it's not like you're committing to coming to a monthly meeting or something like that. Somebody want to talk about the fairy ring, because I feel like that's another big part of the organizing structure that is pretty cool.
So just like any like youth conference or anything like that, it doesn't necessarily work for every individual person to be involved in planning. So we do have like a group of youth that plan the events and help plan the overarching like scheme throughout the year. But obviously it's a youth gathering. There's a lot of open-ended moments and things change on the ground. But that's the fairy ring. It's kind of like, if you want to think of it as like an executive of part of a group, it's kind of like that. It's the group of people that meet more regularly to plan what will happen when we meet in the gathering and to help keep everything cohesive and working together.
This is brilliant. I love the metaphor. Sorry, go ahead, Linnea.
I was just gonna say, like, if people don't know, a fairy ring is a ring of mushrooms. So we felt that was appropriate. It's also really cute. So
very cute.
Yeah.
You can't front on fairies. They are awesome. So I love it. My background's in biology. And so thinking about these fibers that are underground and the communicating that's happening, it's a symbiotic relationship between fungus and plants where they are exchanging information and supporting one another's growth. It's just a brilliant metaphor. And when I first heard about it, I was like, not only is it brilliant, but it also has the possibility for 2 U's.
Anytime we can put in the 2 U's.
Doubly brilliant.
That was one of our like criteria, I think, when naming it, was like, okay, it should be something meaningful, but we also need to be able to fit 2 U's in there somewhere. So yeah.
Which there's a subtle irony there, because it's the Canadian Unitarian Council, right? Not the Canadian Unitarian Universalist Council. Although, side question, is there any talk about becoming the CUUC?
Well, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, you're going to need a different episode for that. The short answer is yes, that has been brought up, but it goes a lot further than that, I'm sure.
All right. Well, okay, we're going to have to invite you back. So tell us a little bit about your process. So you've kind of hinted at, it's a group of youth. There's this executive group, the fairy ring, that meets. But once you meet, what is discussed? What gets planned? What do these things look like as they as fruiting bodies?
I think that's one of the most interesting things, is that there is not one answer to that at all. Like, we have had multiple almost 2 gatherings, and we're coming up on our 3rd at the end of this month now. So our first one, if people don't know, in November, the CUC and like all the member congregations of the CUC passed the 8th principle in Canada. And so our, yes, like that's great. Our first meeting was about the 8th principle because we wanted youth voice on it and we wanted to know people's opinions. And so we facilitated a dialogue about that. There's also some activities thrown in there and stuff like that. And then our last meeting was like an envisioning meeting about like what we want our next year to look like. And so like the planning behind that was a lot of like guiding questions and approaching it from a place of like a more spiritual place rather than a discussion place. And then our next meeting is mostly not even really led by the Fairy Ring or Eric and I. We've invited the CUC's, I think her official title is the Elder in Residence, Sharon Jinkerson Brass, and she's going to be leading us in a reconciliation workshop kind of, but also like an exploration of what it means to do reconciliation in a community. And I think it's going to be a very like it's guided by Sharon, and she just kind of goes where the group needs to go a lot of the time, and like highly recommend anybody who's interested joining us for that, because I know that it's going to be amazing. And yeah, Casey and Eric, do you have things to add? So I feel like there's a lot of process that goes into this.
Yeah, I guess I would say we usually try to put a little bit of something in there for lots of different people. There's usually a focus at each gathering that we either decide on because it seems relevant in the world at the moment we're planning it, or because the last gathering and we got a lot of feedback, people want to do this kind of thing or whatever. And then what we basically, each gathering is planned completely independently based on whatever people are interested in. But there's always usually some kind of fun activity, maybe a little more spiritual kind of a worship for people interested in that kind of thing, discussion and so on. A little bit of free time for people to just hang out, because everyone likes their own different thing, right?
So I'm curious, when you're talking about gathering right now, like just for people listening and maybe listening in the future, this is March of 2022. And so it sounds like you're talking about gatherings in person. Were you ever not gathering in person, or are you not talking about gatherings in person?
Yeah, we've never gathered in person, and there's no plans to gather in person at all.
So when you
sorry,
go on, Derek.
just part of this is to try and create an accessible community as well. Not something that's different, but something that's there to augment the existing conferences, which are historically have been and are going to start being in person again. And so the goal of this is people who may not be able to travel to a conference, or who don't like going to things in person, or for whatever reason, this is a different avenue that you can connect to that community as well. And you can do both things. You can do neither. You can do just one of them. It's all up to the individual, right? But this is more of an online setting where people can gather to give it more options.
And as a quick, oh, sorry, go ahead, Linnea.
It's also like a smaller length of time. Like Canoodle, so our national gathering, and then regional gatherings are like either a weekend, like a 2-day weekend, or a 3-day weekend in the case of Canoodle. And that is exhausting, and people don't have, yeah, again, like Eric said, time, resources to like commit to that. And so this gives people a much more accessible option to participate without having to put in a bunch of money or time, or just, yeah, it's just more accessible, which is awesome.
And who are these participants? Are these elected leaders? Is this open to youth and adults who work with them? What is the age range?
Yeah,
you go ahead.
Okay.
I talk a lot.
So it's open to any and all Unitarian youth in Canada. So we're also including junior youth in that. So 12 to 19 is our age range for youth participation. And they're adult allies. So we also have youth advisors and religious educators and sometimes parents, sometimes other special guests who are wanting to come and support the youth. We often ask the adults to participate as observers, especially at first, because we really want to make sure that we're centering youth voices in that space. And this is getting a little bit honest. It's been the pandemic and youth are not super into online gatherings actually right now. So it's like, all these ideas, like it sounds really cool and awesome and accessible. I think it is all those things. And we're also struggling with actually getting a lot of youth participation. We've had handfuls, I think, so far at each of our gatherings. There's been quite a bit of interest from adults wanting to check it out and see what it's like. And I'm hopeful that they'll be taking that information back to their youth groups and their congregational communities and spreading the word. And we're going to get more momentum and traction, especially as more of life starts to happen in person. I think there'll be a bit more capacity for online stuff again. But yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle, I think, attendance wise so far.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of across the board.
I appreciate that honesty so much, because I think we're all, I know Eric and I both have had these processes of having these really great ideas. And then, maybe we don't get quite the turnout that we expected or we wanted. So I appreciate that honesty so much. But what it sounds like is you didn't create this as like, this is something we're just going to do right now while we can't meet in person. This is something that you want to be ongoing and that you actually see like gathering traction as people do meet in person. That's a fantastic way of looking at it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think this stemmed not just from the need to like do something online with the pandemic. It's a thing, an idea that's kind of started separate from that, because there's always been, if you're not going to a youth con and then you're either hanging out with your local youth group, but there's not a lot outside of the once a year conference, or if you're going to a regional one and a national one, maybe 2 conferences a year. And this is meant to be kind of a space where you can hang out with your youth community, people who you met at conferences, people who you met at online, any combination of that, but you can hang out with those people all year round, which is part of, it's easier to do that online. Obviously, you can't go hang out with someone across the country every weekend, right?
Yeah. And one other interesting, cool idea that we have that hasn't quite got off the ground yet, but will soon, is that part of the MyceliUUm network is going to be this ongoing Discord server as well for youth. So that's kind of another layer of online connection that isn't even limited to those 3 or 4 MyceliUUm gatherings a year, but there'll be a well protected and well moderated space online where youth who are registered for MyceliUUm can join and connect directly with other youth like through the year.
So what this reminds me of, or what I think of, is probably maybe around the same time that you all were coming up with this idea. There was a group here in the United States of youth and young adults who came together and had, exactly the same thought that you're saying, like this idea that, yes, we have to meet, we have to be online, but also even if we couldn't not meet in person, that didn't sound right, but you know what I mean? Even if we weren't restricted to only meeting online, there is a need that we have to connect to people across the whole country, not just in this state that I'm in or in this cluster. Like there was a real need from these youth and young adults to connect to people all across the country, not just at like GA, not just at these like big events that are also sometimes cost prohibitive. People can't travel, all these different reasons. And it amazes me that, well, it shouldn't amaze me because human brains are amazing, the way they work and the way we come up with ideas and connections separately, because in that group, we're also our youth representatives for the Unitarian Universalist Association board were in that group too. So it was almost mirroring a lot of the design function that you have. And just to say that group is called the Young Unitarian Universalist Project. And they're going, in a little different direction right now with it, but it's really amazing to see these correlations. I would love to see what would happen when the Fairy Ring and the Yup design team got together and what kind of amazing ideas you could come up with together.
That was a really good idea, and it's giving me ideas for new connections and new just programming and all kinds of things. So that's really exciting.
We'll make
a note of
connections.
that, Eric.
Yes.
I have my notes app open. I'm making a note right now.
We'll make
Awesome.
introductions.
Didn't realize this was going to be work, right, Mr.
Right.
James?
I do have a question for you about who comes and who can come. And it's often a question that we ask ourselves across the border. Since it is online, is this something that people in the United States can attend or can join? And it's okay to say no, but I think that's what our listeners are gonna wonder.
Do not see why not. Like, it's a welcoming community, of course.
Yeah.
Like, oh, go ahead. We invite like adults to come, and we invite like anyone who wants to come is totally welcome to come. It is more Canadian focused, so it will be talking about things that are more relating more to Canadian issues, UU Canadian issues, but like totally welcome.
There'll still be fun things, no matter where you're from.
And I know a lot of youth. I know a lot of youth from the States who have gone to Canoodle and absolutely loved it. Like, said it was the best thing that they'd ever done. So
Yeah, we love cross-border connections. We need more of them.
There's a special relationship between Canada and the Pacific Northwest in the States. There's a lot of cross-pollination that happens, if I may use another nature metaphor. So this gets me thinking about coming out of the pandemic. And before I get to my question, I just want to make sure our listeners know what GA is. That term's been thrown around a lot. That stands for General Assembly. And that's when Unitarian Universalists in the United States meet once yearly to do their business. And it's in a different city each year. But so we are coming out of this pandemic. We're starting to see communities open up. We're seeing less mask wearing, depending on where you live. And there is a real focus on like what's next. And what we've seen in the States is about 2 years of like hibernation. We haven't had any in-person events. We've lost about 2 years of participation in conferences. We've lost that leadership too. Have y'all had conversations about what's next? Like not necessarily rebuilding what existed before, because I think that would be erroneous on our part. At least that's my opinion. It's time to innovate. It's time to rethink and do something totally new and different, while honoring past traditions. It seems like MyceliUUm is a step in that direction, but what other conversations have you had about building, to quote our president here in the States, to build back better? What is that looking like? Are those conversations happening? I'm curious because as someone who works with youth, I'm kind of scared. Like, how are we going to do this? What's it going to look like? We've lost so much.
Well, I think that was like initially one of the reasons that this got started, was that we were noticing that youth were not as involved, even at the beginning of the pandemic, when Casey, Fiona, who's the senior yob, who kind of envisioned this with me before Eric became the junior yob and I became the senior yob. And I think that this was kind of like a way to like get people involved again and like foster a community. But I think also one of the things that I've been thinking about for the last 2 or 3 years, just being a Unitarian Universalist and a youth, is that I think our communities are probably going to be looking more national as we get smaller. And we might need to become a more national type of community if we continue to get smaller, because eventually like you won't have congregations. And I think talking about it in a way in which like you really emphasize the importance of community, and like national community, which is I think what MyceliUUm is trying to do is really, really important.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh, go on, Casey.
just to say that, yeah, I think like Linnea said, MyceliUUm's part of how we're thinking about moving into the future, with that national community, and also with one of my hopes and dreams too for MyceliUUm is that it's a place where youth can do some of that leadership skills development, and get a taste in like maybe in a less intensive environment than like being on a conference planning team immediately, but like can help start to like plan little things here and there and get a taste of what organizing and youth leadership can be in that kind of context, and then hopefully will help to kind of like rebuild some of that excitement around about contributing to your youth community, and as far as like events and other kinds of projects go. But with all that, like I think it's not going to be immediate, right? Like we're in this period of like slow transformation, I guess, like, and these last couple of years have been really, really hard. So I want us to like be patient with ourselves too, and like really focus on like just being together and like healing and like learning what it's like to be together again, and like envisioning what we want this community to be for ourselves before we start trying to like necessarily rebuild or like build something really new and shiny right away, because I think we're not quite there yet.
And I think Canoodle in May will be kind of a litmus test for participation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's that is so real, right? We want to jump into to getting the things done that we were, and I think a lot of us feel like, oh, we've lost ground. I know that working with youth and young adults, Eric and I have talked about how we regularly have leadership experiences and trainings and all of these things for youth, so that year after year they're mentoring each other and they're building, and we've lost some traction there. And there's this fear that we're losing leadership, youth who will be able to take on leadership roles. And so being patient and recognizing that it doesn't, just because leadership doesn't look the same as it did before, that people can still take, responsibility for community and for being together and healing. So much healing to do. Yeah, thank you.
You said something that I was going to say. You basically said what I was going to say, but I'll reiterate it in my own words a little bit here.
Yeah.
Is that while we don't want to rush into creating something new, we also need to find the balance of recognizing that, like Linnea and I particularly, we're basically at the age where we're going to age out of youth, at least by Canada's CUC definition, and become young adults. So to remember that youth is not one big group, and there's different groups. And it's possible that in this process to rebuild or create something new, the thing that will come out on the end won't look the same as what we had before the pandemic. And we shouldn't be trying to create something that's exactly what we remember happening. We should help create those younger leaders that, like, obviously we're still young, but that are younger in the youth age demographic, who will create their own thing as we move on to young adulthood.
Yeah, and I just want to like share so much gratitude for you, Linnea and Eric, as the senior youth. What you're building is something that you're not necessarily going to reap the benefits of, right? I mean, you're actually your visioning and your building is gonna definitely impact all of these youth who are coming behind you, it's huge. It's wonderful.
It won't benefit us directly, but creating a better youth community will benefit us in the future for sure.
Absolutely.
As those youth become young adults, I'm a young adult now, and creating those connections, creating those leadership experiences, creating an interest in spiritual participation is so important in like the early stages of youthhood, because that's when you really fall in love with Unitarian Universalism. That's really, you really fall in love with the community of Unitarian Universalism in particular. And I think that is one of the biggest things that people have not been able to access, is that they haven't been able to feel the community. And I think that's the thing, regardless of how we get there, that's that's where we need to be. Is we need to have access to just the like community and the love and all of that. And if it happens online, if it happens in person, it doesn't matter. It just needs to happen.
What a lesson for our congregations, right? I mean, so many of our congregations are in this like mad rush to regather and to go back to worship, the way they used to do it. And I think I really wish our congregations would, I mean, this is true throughout our history as a movement, right? It was youth who brought Unitarian and Universalists together prior to the merger in 1961. And like, if our congregations could just be present for the amount of trauma that people endured. Just today at lunch, my wife and I both work from home. I was like, where we have been living through this for 2 years. And she's like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, where has that time gone? What, I mean, and I think everyone is traumatized, and obviously marginalized folks carry a greater burden of that trauma because of the impact on marginalized communities. So like, what are we doing to tend to those spirits, those injured, wounded souls, rather than, all right, business back as usual, folks? I mean, what an important lesson. Anyway, I just have to comment on that.
All right, it is time for us to, unfortunately, it's time for us to wrap up this
Never.
conversation. I know it's so good. I really do. I want to keep talking, and I actually want to bring in more people to talk and like interact. This is good. We will do that. But we want to also mention that MyceliUUm, your next event is the March 26th, your next MyceliUUm gathering. And we're going to put in our show notes, we're going to put a link for information on that. You can also, I know I find out what the CUC youth are doing through Instagram. So you can follow your Instagram, which is
at Yayas of Canada, YAYAS of Canada.
Yeah. Is there anywhere else that they can find you?
You can follow Eric and I at CUCUUm on Instagram. So
and
check it out.
Is
YOB, yeah.
Youth of the board, is that right?
Youth observer to the board, but
to the board. Great,
Fantastic.
great. Well, y'all have been well, y'all have been incredible. We do have to have you back. This conversation is not over. I'd love to check in with you next year and see where MyceliUUm is in a year. Let's talk. Speaking of next Just Breathe Lives, we have our next one. It's going to be Sunday, April 24th at the usual time, 5 p.m., 8 p.m. Eastern is when we have been dropping them. We're considering dropping them now that we're on Apple Podcasts at a different time, so stay tuned. We have Savani Gelfand and special guests speaking about spiritual direction and spiritual companioning. It's going to be a rich conversation, lots to be learned, lots to be explored. So join us, please, if you would. And be sure to like and subscribe to this page. You can follow us on Instagram at Just Breathe Live, 2 U's in that just, and please spread the word.
All right, and we always end our show with a whoosh, which is our breath out. We did a deep breath in to begin with, and our whoosh is how we move our conversation through our bodies and out into the world using embodiment and breath practice. And it just starts up here, and we just push it out with a big sound. Whoosh! Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful talking with you.
Love it. Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Thank you, MyceliUUm.
Thank you.
Bye.
Friends, be sure to subscribe to JBL on your podcast app, and you'll be notified when an episode drops. All right.
Take
Bye,
care,
everyone.
everybody.